The history of Christian theology is shaped by the ways in which theologians have interpreted the Bible. This exegetical history finds in Origen one of its most illustrious representatives. Origen's interpretative works on the biblical text are the first known commentaries in the history of Christianity. I'm thinking of works like his commentary on the Gospel of John that he wrote in response to the very first commentary ever on the Bible written by the Valentinian teacher Heraclian, and that unfortunately we do not have in its complete form. But to understand what it means for Origen to interpret the Bible and to dig deeper into his theological mind, it is necessary to say a few introductory words on what it means to read and interpret the Bible in 3rd century Alexandria. The art of textual interpretation was an integral part of the scholarly education in antiquity. Many Christian theologians like Origen were educated in the classical curriculum and were trained in interpreting texts according to different techniques and methodologies, among which literalist and allegorical interpretations. These interpretations applied to the foundational text of different cultures, like Homer for pagan philosophers and the Hebrew Bible for Jewish intellectuals. These studies were, however, reserved for the elites and were rarely accessible to most people. In this regard, Christianity was different from the classical culture because early Christian theologians often had to preach to uneducated and illiterate audience and had a greater strive to make their message understandable than other Hellenistic intellectuals. Origen interpretations of the Bible had to reach a variety of people from different cultural, social, economic, and personal background, and consequently he adjusted his exegesis to his audience needs. In the 3rd century, most people would have known the biblical text only thanks to the public readings in catechetical schools and during liturgies. Very few Christians had the education to read the Bible by themselves, and even less had the economic means to own their own manuscript or papyri of the biblical text. Moreover, the biblical canon was not set in the 3rd century, and Christians were still fighting about which books could be or could not be considered canonic. In his life, Origen made his personal mission to educate as many people as possible to understand the finesse of the biblical text. He taught both advanced students in schools and catechumens in the catechetical schools and preached the Bible for everyone with homilies during the liturgies. According to his biographer Eusebius, he taught both men and women, as he believed that women could be as intellectually advanced as men and could advance in the understanding of Scripture. Origen is probably the most famous proponent of the existence of multiple meanings of the biblical text. He often states that the Bible has 2 levels of interpretation, the literal meaning and the allegorical meaning. The literal meaning is the immediate sense of the biblical text. The allegorical meaning is the reasoned meanings of the biblical text. While the literal sense is evident to all listeners and readers of the Bible, and it is often embedded in the narrative itself, and it does not require additional speculation to be understood by the audience, the allegorical meanings need a deeper knowledge of Scripture. It is often composite and can be grasped only by cross-referencing one text with the others. This twofold exegesis is sometimes described by Origen as a threefold exegesis. In passages like on the first principle 424, Origen compares the scriptures to a human being that is composed by a body, a soul, and a spirit. The body is the literal sense. The soul is the moral sense that should guide the moral life of Christians. And the spirit is the higher allegorical spiritual meaning that only few will achieve. However, I usually distinguish between a literal sense and allegorical sense, as the moral sense is often one of the possible allegorical meanings of a passage according to Origen. But then we have a question: how does Origen determine when it is necessary to use one sense rather than the other? Do all texts have both an allegorical and a literal meaning? when should an interpreter of the Bible resort to the allegorical meaning? Origen discusses these questions at length in his works, but his views can be summarized in this passage taken from his On the First Principle, particularly the Philokalia. Origen explains that the scriptures have a spiritual meaning, but not all texts have a literal meaning. Origen admits that certain passages of the Bible, when taken literally, do not make any sense and should be interpreted only according to their allegorical sense, which in this passage he calls the principal sense, but it's a spiritual higher sense of the scripture. This allegorical meaning, he says, is scattered throughout the scriptures, and only the expert exegete can weave it together by piecing different passages from other books. This technique is part of the ancient quotation culture, of which Origen makes ample use in his works. According to Origen, the spiritual meaning is necessary for a comprehensive understanding of the Christian message, and the literal meaning is not sufficient. Origen believes that the scripture contains a pedagogical path to move Christians towards God, and that understanding the spiritual meaning is an essential part of the Christian's life purpose. In this passage of his commentary on the Gospel of John, Origen does not deny that the literal gospel may contain meaning, but he stresses that the Christians should strive for the deeper spiritual sense of the scripture in order to achieve salvation. How then can one discern the allegorical meaning of a text? What is the correct allegorical meaning of a text? Origen believes that there are some driving criteria in establishing the allegorical meanings. The first is Christology. Christ is the incarnated Word. He is in the Bible, and Christology is at the core of his exegesis, and the allegorical meaning is inextricably linked to the identity and example of Christ the Logos. The meanings of the scriptures and their Christological contents are revealed according to the capacity of each human being, because Christ reveals himself to people according to their own understanding. These books contain teachings which lead to the salvation of human being, which Origen interprets as the union with the Word. Origen believes also that there is a rule of faith, and he explains this rule in detail in the first book of his On the First Principles. And it encompasses all the core beliefs of a Christian. Origen also believes that the scriptures are unitary, and he believes in the validity of both Old and New Testament. So against the dualistic Christian movements like the Valentinians, Origen believed firmly in the unitary nature of the two testaments. The Old Testament foreshadowed the truth of the Christian message of the Gospels, and many of these truths are revealed also in the Old Testament. The true meaning of the scriptures is understood only by creating a unitary narrative between the various books of the Bible. To conclude this brief survey about Origen's exegesis, I'd like to mention why this matters nowadays and what makes Origen still relevant. So first of all, Origen is the first theologian to stress the multiple meanings of the scriptures. It does not have a monolithic interpretation of the Christian message. Moreover, the unity and divinity of the scriptures does not imply that there is only one possible meaning and one possible reading. Allegorical exegesis for Origen is a way to understand how the scriptures remain relevant for readers throughout the century, and this makes him one of the greatest theologians of the first centuries of Christianity.